Rolling?
We're live.
All right. I'm convening and calling to order the Ojai Building Appeals Board for December 19th, 2017. No, we start with the, whoops, that's me. No, we start with the roll call, I believe.
Member Daddy?
Here.
Member Libby? Here.
Here. Pull your mic down.
Here.
And myself, Dale Hansen, I'm here.
Very good. Okay, and then we'll start with the next move to the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you like to do this, Judy?
Yes. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Next, we have public communication. Public communications at times set aside during the Building Appeals Board meeting for members of the public to address the Building Appeals Board on items of city business other than scheduled agenda items. Matters raised at this time may be briefly discussed by the board and will generally be referred to staff and/or placed on a subsequent agenda. Under state law, other than for emergency items, no action or non-agendized items can be taken at this meeting. Any public communication? I have no cards, so we're going to go forward then to our first discussion item, which is a presentation and this. Actually, if I might, there's two items I think that are sort of, or three items that I think are introductory for the record and as well as the public who might be watching. This Building Appeals Board hearing was scheduled for CAL FIRE and also Ventura County Fire Department, coincidentally in October. There was no relationship, no specific relationship with the Thomas Fire, but we're certainly glad that CAL FIRE and the Ventura County Fire Department are here and contributing their knowledge and information. The map that will be referenced during the course of this hearing is on the boards that are ideally visible on camera before us, and that is the CAL FIRE Very High Fire Hazard Zone in LRA map. It's referred to on this agenda, if you're reviewing the agenda online, as the city's CAL FIRE map. But this map was generated by CAL FIRE in 2007 and has been the only map that the city has to reference from that for purposes of very high fire hazard zone in LRA and refresh my memory. Local responsibility area is LRA. Next is the Building Appeals Board agenda is available online. Is the packet that backs it up with the responses by CAL FIRE and Ventura County Fire Department also available online? Okay. What should be available is not only the agenda, which is quite a short item, it's one page, but also the responses to a previous list of questions that the Building Appeals Board had generated, which extend to 23 pages, which are referenced as the packet, which is what we have up here, but also has essential information, responses to those queries by CAL FIRE and Ventura County Fire Department, and a lot of information. And the sections of the code referenced are the California Government Code, which is sections 51175 through 51189. So, I think that's the extent of the introductory information that's necessary. Do you have something to add to that, Judy?
I just wanted to inquire, because I had to miss the November meeting, I wanted to prepare for tonight by reviewing the video of that, and I couldn't find it online. Is it there? Am I just being not very good with my internet, or?
I don't know if it was posted or not. We definitely recorded it.
You did record it?
Yes.
Okay. I could not find it on the city site. Will you? Thank you.
And with that in mind, in the event that any of the public who views this on YouTube or Channel 10 have any questions regarding availability of that, in other words, you can't access it, please make inquiry directly to the city. Any other comments before we dive into the discussion? We good as far as the maps are concerned? Yes? Yes, Mr. Vega.
Can I just make one comment? So just to confirm, the report and the attachments are posted on the website.
Okay.
now. So-
Fabulous. All right, thanks so much. So, discussion item number 1 is the presentation and discussion with CAL FIRE and Ventura County Fire Department representatives for amending the city's CAL FIRE map for incorporated and unincorporated areas within the Ojai sphere of influence. And once again, what we're hearing testimony, presentation, and discussing is the current status of the CAL FIRE map, which references
We'll get it.
risk to the city and to parcels and properties within the perimeter of the city limits as well as within the Ojai sphere of influence, and how that map may be amended or modified to reflect existing conditions and a more comprehensive perspective of the city and existing conditions relative thereto regarding combustible fuel and fire threat. So, shall we?
Chair,
Yes.
for the benefit of the public, could we have our participating companion, CAL FIRE and Ventura Fire, maybe step up to the podium, introduce themselves, so when at least the community at large is going to understand who's here to assist us. And so when we're speaking, they kind of don't know who's back there because the camera's single vision.
Yeah, and that also might require whoever stands up there and introduces themselves to us to turn around and introduce yourself to the camera so that the public can see who that is. You know, I think that would be appropriate. So that might be 2 introductions, or at least a sideways introduction. At this point,
Mr. Chair, we were waiting for Chief McNeil.
right.
Who's probably now about 7 minutes away, I believe. Would it be okay with you gentlemen if you want to do the introductions while we're waiting for Chief McNeil? Okay. Is that right?
That was directed at the CAL FIRE folks.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, most of the people know Chief McNeil. I'm sorry, they may not
been
have
here a
been.
few times.
They may not have been introduced to you, but
Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Appeals, my name is Jason Newman. I'm an Assistant Chief, CAL FIRE Southern Region Headquarters. I'm representing the Office of the State Fire Marshal. And with the Land Use Planning Program, we deal with the safety elements of the general plans. We identify the cities between Sacramento and Mexico, the local hazards, and we address the safety element. The maps are one component of the safety element. But most importantly, I'd like to thank the Ventura County Fire Department for the invitation, and also the City of Ojai and the Board of Appeals for contacting Ventura County Fire Department. We're here this evening. We're in support of Ventura County Fire Department, as well as we stand united. As Chairman Ulrich mentioned, the questions that were forwarded to the Ventura County Fire Department were forwarded to the state of California. Our agency representative, Captain Gene Pocky, I'll have him come up here in a minute and introduce himself, as well as his assistant, Captain Lindo. We have the questions. We'll go over those questions in the presentation. And again, want to thank you very much for the invitation this evening. Thank you.
Fabulous, and because my eyesight isn't so good, how, could... yeah.
Newman. Jason Newman, Neuman. That's
No,
Newman.
it's NEU, it's not like NEW. Very good.
Great, thank you. I'll turn it over
Thanks so
to Captain Pocky.
And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gene Podke. I'm a fire captain with CAL FIRE, Office of the State Fire Marshal, Land Use Planning Program. The county of Ventura, Santa Barbara, Monterey, and San Luis Obispo, San Benito counties all fall within my response area, my service area for land use planning.
That's a fair piece of country.
Yes, but the best clam chowder is located all along that central coast.
And thank you very much for helping us, and thank you very much for the people that have assisted in getting the answers back to these questions. The community really appreciates that.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Appeal Board. My name is Kevin Lindo. I am Gene Potke's partner. I am currently assigned as a captain, land use planning for CAL FIRE in the Fresno office. I'm here, like I said, as Gene's counterpart. My jurisdiction is Stanislaus County to Kern County, so I have Central Sierras or Central California.
It's also a fair piece of country.
And again,
It's
thank
lovely
you
this time
very
of
much
year.
for being here.
Thank you.
Taking time, and we know how busy it is at this time.
Good evening. My name is Larry Williams. I'm a fire prevention officer with the Ventura County Fire Department. So I'll be here in support of Chief McNeil for the stuff that, responses he has. Also worked on input to the responses. My normal function is I manage our fire hazard reduction program county-wide and in the 6 cities that we also serve.
Isn't there a whole bunch of Williams that have been on the department?
Over the years, I
That
think we
name
have
seems
about 8
familiar.
right now.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask another question. Building official, are we filling in for a few minutes till my neighbor, the chief, can get here? Because I don't want to start without him. But you know what? We have a couple of people in the audience, Chair. And because we really do need to hold the meeting up until the chief gets here, I would certainly like a couple of the people that have come here to be able to express what their thoughts are, because they may not get a chance later. And
Okay.
they're
Then-
here, and we have at least one person
Okay.
that is from the Planning Commission as a liaison, and I think it would be interesting to hear some concepts and thoughts and some ideas that they're currently working on as individuals or as the Planning Commission.
Right. So I'm Kathy Nolan. I'm a planning commissioner, and presently I'm also on the Sustainability Committee, and in the past worked on the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, so having to do a lot with water and fire. And recently I've also had one meeting with Mr. Ulrich and Mr. Daddy, and then additional ones with Mr. Daddy on how the Planning Commission and the Building Appeals Board, I know they're Title IX and Title X, but there's some overlap, how we could collaborate and come together with developing some guidelines and what have you. I did attend the special city council meeting last night, and I did get up and speak, and I shared some of the things that we've been looking at. And in particular in landscape, I will share that it's interesting, I brought this up to our planning director at our last meeting in November. Our December 6th meeting, of course, was canceled due to the fire. I'm a landscape architect by trade, and I've done landscape plans in the unincorporated area in the valley and also in LA County, in Malibu, for instance, high fire zones. And you're required to do a fuel modification plan. So you're actually doing a landscape that's geared to fire, in addition to doing like clearing and maintenance, and all those notes go into your plan in the existing habitat. And I have not had the experience as a landscape architect to do one in the city of Ojai in a high fire zone, but I happened to look on the city website just to see if that information was there. I couldn't find anything, and then I asked our interim planning director, And he said, as far as he knew, we didn't have something like that. And so these are the things that.
Could you
explain
state
that?
again what it was?
Yeah,
that
a
you were-
fuel modification plan. So this is something that's required by, I'm not going to say all jurisdictions, but I believe probably, I'm guessing the majority in the state of California, especially in high fire areas, require that when somebody's pulling a permit and they have to submit landscape plans, that one of the plans is a fuel modification plan, and their planting plan and irrigation and what have you correspond to a fire-safe landscape, and then also how to clear and maintain existing vegetation. And presently, as far as I know, the city of Ojai does not have that. I know we have limited building in that area. We're a small community, but nevertheless, I think that's something we'd want to pursue. So these are some of the things that I shared last night. I won't go into everything, but I just kind of wanted to share that to get started. Unless you have any questions, I'm.
Oh, well, are there any plans to develop?
Well, I actually,
that you're aware of?
I wasn't on the agenda last night, but I did get up with a speaker's card during the item on fire safety and what have you. And I did share that if the city council was open and willing, that I'd be willing to be a volunteer working either with BAPS or with Planning Commission to bring forward the items in our present code that are either missing or I think need to be adapted or modified to make us more fire safe. In addition, that includes water issues too. So yes, and then I have Planning Commission tomorrow night to ask to be on the agenda for the following meeting if we can cover these items or at least present them. So I'm hoping we can move forward with that. There seemed to be a positive interest from the city council.
As well, that's appropriate, I think.
Yes.
Considering.
Kathy, are non-indigenous plants more flammable than indigenous, or is there any difference at all?
Well, that's a really broad stroke question, and interestingly enough, the day of the fire, before the fire broke out, I got a call from the local paper, and they asked if I would be a part of a series of, fire escape articles that they were going to put in. I said, sure, I'd love to. And so he goes, I'll call you tomorrow on Tuesday, and I'll shoot over some questions. And sure enough, Monday night after work, and it was kind of late, I get on my computer. Of course, the power went out, and I couldn't respond to the questions. I ended up evacuating. My grandkids were with me, and my son lived in the upper Ojai. I had to get evacuated. So long story short, he contacted me the following week, and I responded. But he asked me a very similar question. He said, oh, tell me some plants to put in the article. And I said, that's kind of the last thing you want to look at. You want to look at principles first. And when you're making your fire selections, number one, you want to first look at where are you in the landscape, where's your property at. So it might be different if you're downtown as to if you're in the wildland-urban interface. And then the lots are typically bigger on the outskirts of town. So when you're doing fire zoning, they say, from the house and 30 feet out. Well, if you're downtown, you're lucky if you've got 5 and 12 on each side of you. So it's different. But generally what you're looking for is plant material that's not as flammable, doesn't have resins in it or certain oils, has a greater moisture capacity. And all these plants, there's lists all over the state with, say, a factor, like a fire factor next to them, and appropriate information as to where in the landscape you would want to use or not use them. Some of the natives are really flammable, and you don't want them around your house.
That's true.
So, but it's just good to know that, once again, kind of go by the principle first and then dial it into as to where you're at.
Chair?
Yeah.
One last question. The LA Times printed a really nice article about the place we look at all the time for a lot of our rules, Santa Barbara. And it's pretty interesting. They have a very extensive list of
Oh, I've been using their list for years.
Yeah, you can't have. You can't have
Yeah.
this.
Yeah,
and
they have a
this. So-
firescape garden, actually, that, like a demonstration. I don't know if it made it through the fire, though. But they did have one. They may still. But I also want to mention, I'm working with the Green Coalition on the demonstration garden behind City Hall here. And I met with him a couple months ago.
And it caught fire last night.
Yeah, well, basically, I went out there, and I was involved with it years ago when it first came into being. And that was like, I think 20 years ago, if not more. But when I met with them, I said, well, the first thing we need to do is you need to clean up out here. There's a lot of eucalyptus, there's a lot of shredded bark that's like 2 or 3 feet high, dead plant material. And I said that would be the first thing is a cleanup. And then when we were discussing what would be there, I said we should do a little firescape garden, like a demonstration, and maybe even have some plants and label them and possibly some other principles of design with fire, in addition to water and what have you. But just thought I'd throw that in as hopefully something we can do in the city.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Captain McNeil's here.
Yes. Before we move to that, I thought of two other matters that perhaps should be addressed. And this is for the public as well as for our purposes soon. The aftermath of any major fire, especially one that's this or ostensibly in the middle of the rainy season, is rainfall, a rain event that's sufficient to cause mud and debris flow off of the somewhat vertical terrain we have everywhere around our community. There is, since we're discussing the fire hazard map, there is also a FEMA flood map that the city has that, if you're not aware of it, should be consulted relative to your property and to other thoroughfares or properties that may be adjacent to you that might be impacted by potential debris flow or mud or flooding. And I believe I will also, what I'd like to request is that we agendize that for a future meeting, or at least we get a look at it. I don't know where it is. Do you? Is there one posted in the at the city?
We have to take your request to council to get permission to look at the FEMA flood maps, and I can certainly do that.
Oh, do we have one?
They are
Available in
in
the
possession of the Public Works Department.
Okay. All right, so there's not one posted or in display for the public at this time?
I don't know if they're in display in the Public Works office or not.
No.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I haven't noticed it when I've been down there. So, okay. I'm going to reiterate it, that I'm requesting that be placed on, just as this was placed on an earlier agenda. The CAL FIRE map, due to the fire threat, and this was back in October again, we are in the middle of the rainy season, and at this point I'm going to request that the FEMA flood map be made available to the Building Appeals Board. So process that how it needs to be. I'd also like to, would you, Board Member Daddy, like to make another public service announcement regarding flood insurance?
Unfortunately, FEMA, Department of Homeland Security, has got some fairly stringent rules. The rules are thus: when you apply for a flood policy, were you to apply for a flood policy today, get the application done, get everything completed, it has a 30-day waiting period from the date of application. So that would mean that if it were applied for today, the earliest day that it would be active or current or able to handle a claim would be January 19th. And we're getting very, very late into the rainy season. I have no idea, because of the extensive hills that are denuded, what this thing is going to be. But we currently have over 600 active lots in the flood zone at this time in Ojai. Mr. Grant, Public Works, did a great job, reduced the amount from over 1,000 as designated by FEMA initially with their map. They got it rezoned down to 600, but that's still 600 homes that there's a reason to believe we'll have some type of a water problem. And I think that this may be that year.
So it might be prudent for property owners who are concerned about that to consult the FEMA map, which at this point we understand the city to have in the Department of Public Works at the very bottom of Signal Street, for applicability to their particular parcel and residence. If they do not have flood insurance, they might consider obtaining it, and it's my understanding is it's relatively readily available. Okay, so I think at this point, since the chief has arrived, would you like to make an introduction? And you may just want to shift back because we only have one camera, so it's kind of like a mugshot thing.
Where's the
there
camera?
you go. It's back there. So yes, that one there.
Face that way, but talk to you.
Well, no,
just
when
you
make
can
your
wave and say
introduction,
hi.
so they know the face.
So
to
they
go
know the
with name.
face.
Gotcha. Well, good evening. I'm John McNeil. I'm a division chief for Ventura County Fire Department. And I wanted to kind of bring into context how we got to this point tonight. As some of you on the board know, I met early on when I took this position about 7 months ago, because in the position I have as a division chief with the county fire department, I represent to the city the department. So one of the early discussions with Mr. Ulrich and Mr. Daddy was, among other things, the state fire severity map and the updating of the map and the process in which that happens and the different roles each of the entities have. So after a couple discussions, we got back and forth and we thought, well, it's a CAL FIRE program. It's a CAL FIRE staffed program. They're the experts with it. Us as local entities have some influence in the results of that or the data that goes into that. But it's really this team that it sounds like already has introduced themselves. They're the experts with it, so we thought let's get them here, do a presentation, have the conversations, and any of the questions that come up, hopefully will get answered during the presentation, but if not, then obviously a question and answer period. But I also want to speak to the relationship Ventura County Fire Department has with CAL FIRE. Ventura County Fire is one of 6 county departments in the state that actually is a contract county to CAL FIRE. And what that means is in the absence of CAL FIRE resources in the area, we contract with CAL FIRE to provide the services to the state responsibility areas within the county. So there's a lot of times I could wear their patch on my other shoulder on some of the responses we go to, and I think that's real clear in the last 2.5 weeks we've been dealing with the Thomas Fire is in the state lands. It's CAL FIRE's responsibility, but with our contract we get their initial response and then come together as a team. So I represent with them on this effort, and I'll leave it at that. And I look forward to the presentation. I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot about it too, and I hope you do too. And I'll be around for more questions.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so do we want to start with the administrative report?
Sure. At the city council meeting, July 11th of 2017, the council assigned 5 tasks for the Building Appeals Board to complete. This item is one of the tasks assigned. It is it was for amending the city's CAL FIRE map for incorporated and unincorporated areas within the Ojai sphere of influence. So we have invited CAL FIRE and Ventura County Fire to review the questions that we developed at our last meeting and come to this meeting and make a presentation and be available to the board for any questions that you might have regarding the fire map. So at this point, I'll turn it over to the fire department.
Hello. I thought before we get into the questions, maybe for the sake of the public that may be watching now or later, You may want just a brief history of how the fire maps came to be. If you think that would be relevant?
Absolutely.
Okay. So basically what had happened, we had the tunnel fire back in 1991. Most people remember that as the Oakland Hills fire. And it was a very devastating fire. About 2,500 residential units were destroyed. I believe there was 25 fatalities that came out of that. About $2 billion worth of losses were filed. So resulting from that fire, Assemblyman Tom Bates sponsored a bill to have the entire state of California mapped for fire hazard zones, severity zones. And there were 3 zones that were created, a moderate, a high, and a very high. And the intent behind that was to communicate the wildland fire hazard threat to communities so that an informed decision can be made about how to reduce that risk. In essence, from that, building codes were developed. You have hazard reduction codes were developed. Senate Bill 1241 that passed in 2012 required a review of an entity's safety element through the lens of wildfire should that entity have a very high fire hazard severity zone designation. And there are a slew of other codes and government codes that are built upon that. We have a lot of government codes in the state. I couldn't recite them all to you, but that's essentially where we are with the maps. So if you want, we can answer their questions. Just write down the list, 1 through, I think it was 10.
Did you have anything that would precede that? Anything that you wanted to?
I have a question, because here's what we're here for. We're here really to learn and convey.
Mm-hmm.
This thing with Dale and I, we have been urging City Council to take a look at this thing since we got it in 2010, which was the 2007 map.
Mm-hmm.
When we looked at it, we weren't terrifically happy with what was done as the final product. It looked a little different than maybe we thought it should. I'm wondering if it isn't going to be better for us to learn and proceed faster, rather than go down all these questions that were asked a couple of months ago and had been compiled for the first part of the year. Now that we've actually had the event,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these questions are irrelevant because we have actual experience. And I just kind of hate to saw sawdust. We have a lot of people that don't need an education on some of this stuff. And so I'm wondering if it would be kinder to ask some questions and kind of get into some definitions and some other things where we can just, I hope this is just a teaching, learning thing. I really want to learn out of this. I really want you to teach. So we can do some things and make some recommendations to council and go along with the buildings and go along with some changes and go along with these other things and fuel reduction inside. That's kind of what I think, at least my motive is to make this a harder, safer community. We dodged a bullet, no fatalities. We didn't lose the structure in the city limits. We'd like to keep it that way. But now all the fire risk is inside the city. Everything around the city, that little donut hole is us. Correct. And so everything in the middle now is really what we need to concern ourselves. So whatever you think, if you want to go down the line and hit all the questions or hit all the questions that have been pre-answered, or if you'd just like to take the remaining questions left, whatever makes the most sense.
Ask away.
Okay.
Ask, please.
Yeah. So the federal lands, we border the federal lands. Who's responsible for clearing the fuel, the dead brush and so forth, that border our city? Who's responsible for that?
That I'd have to direct that question to a federal representative. It is open space.
Right.
So I would hope that you had a local fire safe council, a community wildfire protection plan that works in conjunction with the federal government, state entities, in this case Ventura County Fire District representing the state, and themselves, the county fire, working collectively for fuel reduction programs that can be a strategic foothold for the city.
So we're responsible to see that that's done. I mean, we have a fire safe council that you've started,
Correct.
so, but it's kind of new. So that's, the federal government and CAL FIRE is not responsible for that border that we are on with the forest?
As far as the
Clearing.
federal side of the line, if you will?
Yeah,
Yeah, I couldn't speak absolute to
Okay.
that. I don't want to misinform anyone.
Okay. Anyone?
So, we're going to start this way or this way? I don't really,
She
okay,
had
we'll
a
start this
question,
way.
and now you have,
Captain, I went through all of the rules, highlighted everything. I went through the last BAB meeting, I went through the prior BAB meeting. And I think what I'm really pretty much interested in, or at least I'll give you an overview of where I think I'm trying to go. I'm trying to see if we can't redraw the map as it actually exists for local conditions within the city today. And I'm trying to understand why one part of the city that was evacuated isn't in the same high fire zone as the next block that was also evacuated. It seems that the very high fire hazard zone is too small in the city, and the borders are very small, and we had an incredible amount of concern in those areas, and they'll grow back. The only way to stop brush, either plant or build. It'll come back. It's not this year, next year, 5 years, 10 years, it'll be back. And so what I'd like to see and understand how we go ahead and amend, modify, reshape, do what we need to do to get the map to more reflect what we have. Again, I don't think the one area of town which people will understand, which is the west side, is the Arbolada, is that much safer than the north side, which was the upper foothill. They pretty much are exactly contiguous neighborhoods. Yet one is not in it at all. It's not even a moderate or a high. We only have a severe to zero. And it just doesn't seem that the fire behavior just kind of stops at these little lines. And so what I'm trying to understand tonight and learn is how we go ahead and make changes to this thing and how we get definitions and understand what the definitions and where Dale said on the federal lands, try to understand authorities. So I guess that's what I'm trying to pursue. And as I go through here, I look at a thing called local authority, and then I look at definitions first. And it looks like who can change a map? The local authority can change a map. And it looks like a city is the local authority or is a local authority. Is that correct? The city has the ability to submit for map changes?
The agency having authority is that is responsible for the fire suppression, prevention and fire suppression. What I encourage you to do, and that would be Ventura County Fire District, is with the city, working with your local fire experts during the draft period of the maps, which should be coming out here next year, is to work with your local experts to have the empirical evidence, to have that discussion with the Fire Resource Assessment Program, FRAP. They're the authors of the map. I think I heard before in your previous meetings, you'd mentioned Dave Sapsis. Dave Sapsis is still spearheading that program. And having those conversations with him as to why you believe pieces of the city should be taken out or more should be added. But there needs to be some empirical data that says so.
Okay, and we do what this tells us. We take a look at hazard, which is the fuel load and where it is, and we would compare hazard per hazard contiguous with the outside wildland fire. Like I'm going to try not to mention things because you don't understand the geography here, and that's not going to be fair. But it says where we have contiguous wildland fire. So we have a number of areas in the city that still have some pretty heavy outside brush outside the city.
and it should be noted, those areas that are within the city aren't on this map. and they've always existed as high combustible fuel store areas. There's canyons that transect the city that aren't on this map. So from a practical perspective, I have a concern that since the state, whether that's CAL FIRE or some other subdivision of the state, missed the 2015 iteration of this map update, and the next one is projected for 2020, and presumably it's developed in the next year or so for that adoption period, that by that time other things could happen, since, as Board Member Daddy referenced, the only significant combustible fuel sources that are existent in the city are existent in the city. Everything else has been effectively consumed, or at least for the near term. But also, I'm looking at these responses, and for purposes of local agency, the definition under California Government Code Section 5177 says it means a city, and county or district responsible for, or. So, from our perspective, I don't think that waiting is a good option, and I think we should, with the other entities you'd related, commence this process ostensibly with what we're talking about tonight, our subsequent recommendations of the City Council, and then whatever the City Council decides to adopt and implement from there. But this map has not been accurate for 10 years. It doesn't represent what we have on the ground. And further, my larger concern is the map doesn't relate to what's outside of it. So any of the properties that are not marked in the red zone for the public are presumed not to be in a high fire hazard area, yet without knowing what's on outside the perimeter, which is still within the Ojai City sphere of influence, there's no relationship. And those properties could be affected by what's immediately outside the line of that map. So there's a certain arbitrary application of things that don't take into consideration, once again, the actual factual basis of what's on the ground, literally.
Okay. There is a county map on the CAL FIRE website that shows the very high, the high, and the moderate. This map is a specific link just to your city. So you can reference what is beyond your city borders on our website. You can see the whole county wide, so where it is continuous for your very high that's in the city, as it continues into the county, and then as it moves into the SRA or FRA.
Is that downloadable for printing out so we can post it in the city?
Yes, it should be, yes.
Okay, because I don't know if that's where we got this from, and it was only a portion of it. But I also know from the the questions and the responses to the questions by both CAL FIRE and Ventura County Fire that there's a protocol for the distribution of this information. And I don't know whether this came hard copy or whether this came in an email or this came, as you indicated, it's on the website for downloading purposes, you know, and there's a notification, an email, a letter to that effect. But at this point, especially after this fire event, suffice it to say the public has a huge thirst for information and knowledge that suddenly this stuff that a couple of us have been, a few of us have been discussing for several months, if not several years, and now has come, you know, I think before that we were somewhat viewed as perhaps unnecessarily concerned about something that didn't need that kind of attention at the moment. But it's like any kind of a risk. It's not a problem until all of a sudden, you know, there's smoke on the horizon and the wind's blowing. That is, we're going to try to do that. Can the city, or do we have to make a resolution for this? Can the city obtain a map off this website or directly from CAL FIRE if you're unable to do so, that can be posted in the lobby at City Hall or elsewhere. In Public Works would be nice.
You
as
want the
well.
entire Ventura County map?
No, just let's put it this way, at this point, the city and its sphere of influence, because that addresses the immediate area outside the city limits, and I think that's sufficient.
I'll see
Would
what
you
I can do.
agree?
I know I can get the Ventura County one because it's on the website.
Well,
I'll
then if
see what I
perhaps
can
it can
do.
be edited or something, so it's not over, doesn't have unnecessary information to the folks that are here, but, that'll be a judgment call.
Chair, I'd like to add on to that. A number of years ago, there was discussion, and a number of us were very successful, depending on who you believe, in getting a wildland surcharge, that $150 surcharge to the 850,000 people living in the interface. That just was removed at the start of this year. What's the possibility of getting that map? Because it would appear to me there's a correlation where if you're paying a surcharge, you have to be in some type of severity zone, or I wouldn't believe that charge would apply. And the majority of the people in the valley, as I heard a number of people say, we're paying that charge, and that was dropped. So is there a way for us to get that? Because there's got to be a correlation. You're not paying a surcharge, a fire surcharge, for not being in a specific high zone.
You're referring to the SRA fees?
Yes.
The SRA fees in the fire hazard severity zones are two different programs.
Okay.
And so the SRA fees went to work towards prevention measures in the SRA. One of the, at the time, those fees did fund the land use planning program, where I am today. And that is to work with the local entities that have the very high fire hazard severity zone for planning purposes and your safety element. So, but that fee went out to all individuals in the SRA.
Okay.
Not
Is
just
there a way
specific to the very high or high only.
Oh, is it everybody in the SRA then? So SRA map should be readily available for the Ojai Valley, correct or no? What do we think?
Would you care to define SRA so that the acronym is?
Okay, let me define the SRA. It would be that area that would be north of the city. It would be east of the city. At the top of the city, it would be on Fairview Road. It would be Matillahawk Canyon. They were all assessed that fee. So it's a very broad area. It was $150 a parcel at that time for 7, 8, 9 years up until this last year. Then it was removed. The purpose of that fee initially is presented, not what was adopted, was we had a particularly tough year one year. We had $1 billion worth of wildfire expenses in California. And the thought process was, if you're going to live at the end of the line where it's very hazardous and you have a probability of needing extra help, then you should pay for that extra help. And the state went ahead and kind of granted that at the time. That's the best of my recollection, because we had a liaison who was with Schwarzenegger at that time for insurance affairs.
And once again, SRA for the public?
State
responsibility.
State responsibility area.
Yeah.
Okay. Tom?
Yeah. I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Chairman Ulrich was talking about, some of the houses outside of the area. I know some research during the Cedar fire, when CAL FIRE issued its recommended zone, San Diego found that the state had missed some areas according to reports to the city council at the time. CAL FIRE used to dealing with big, huge forested areas, but in our city, there's a lot of finger canyons. That became a risk, said San Diego Fire Rescue Department Assistant Fire Marshal Eddie Villavicencio, who was a code enforcement officer at the time. The map that the city ultimately adopted in 2009 added dozens of those finger-like extensions, plus a wide swath of central San Diego that included the community of Scripps Ranch, a neighborhood of medium to large tract homes that burned down in the Cedar fire. So I think that kind of piggybacks on what you were talking about, is some of the areas that's not covered by the fire map.
Yeah, and that term Finger Canyon is what I was referring to here. We have Stewart Canyon, there's other direct pass or points of ignition due to their fuel load that are right in the heart of the city and could, under even a moderate breeze condition, I think become very problematical to the homes that are built right up against them. So, do you have something you'd like to say?
No, I have a lot of other questions, but we have a lot of other people have questions, so go ahead.
Anyone else?
But she hasn't spoken yet, so go ahead, Judy.
I'm interested in the enforcement aspect of this whole problem. I realize that the city of Ojai is different from the Ventura County fire responsibility. But how do we, for example, Site 10 is the area that's right behind City Hall, and it for years has accrued piles of dead brush and dead bushes and dead trees. As a person who lives here in the city and I, see something like that, who do I go to get that ameliorated?
Within your city limits, I think that would fall to your code enforcement.
Our code enforcement? Okay. And if it's outside the city limits, we go to the fire department, Ventura, or where?
Yes.
Give that guy a break.
So that particular parcel you're talking about, it's 10 acres, and it's going to fall, it has fallen into our fire hazard reduction program within Ventura County's prevention program. Larry Williams is the lead of that unit. It hadn't been in the program up until this year. It was a discussion I had with Councilman Wyrick, and the notice was generated. I had conversations with the city manager, and in an attempt to balance the requirement with the financial burden to the city, we came up with a plan to use CAL FIRE resources, in particular their hand crews, to help with the mitigation of the plant or the vegetation.
Mm-hmm.
We started that in process. The fire season came upon us. We lost that resource to do the work. And again, in an effort to not burden the city with financial issues on that, but to get the issue mitigated, it's been put off till this coming year. But it is in the weed abatement or FHRP program, that particular parcel. So there is ways within the city to enforce combustible vegetation abatement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of them. If it doesn't meet that program, and Larry can speak to the specifics of the criteria of that program, there is ways to enforce it through code enforcement on public nuisance language.
Who declares the public nuisance within the city?
If it's a public nuisance based on a fire hazard, it's a fire official that determines the fire hazard. So that would be myself or anyone that's representing the fire department in the area.
Why wouldn't it be a code compliance? Since it's a jurisdictional issue.
Building official. It would be the building official that would, for
if there's a fire hazard, well, you can speak to the details of it, but the way I understand it, if there's a fire hazard that is the code violation, the fire department or a fire representative determines that it's a hazard and it can be enforced through code enforcement, if that makes sense. You can probably clarify that, though.
Yeah.
Who do you report it to?
I'm sorry?
As a citizen, who would you start with? Who do you report?
Either the city or the fire department.
You can report it to the city's code enforcement. I do know that this year we did actually notice 6 properties for combustible vegetation, and we did get 100% compliance on the 6 properties that we did. So if you have a property that you would like us to look at, please file a complaint with the code enforcement officer, and we will take a look at it, and we will work with Ventura County Fire if we need to, or we'll use the city resources.
Good, thank you.
Hey, I'm confused about something, though. Since the city receives fire services from county fire. And since the city, because of that, or as part of that, is part of the Ventura County Fire Prevention District, going back to, what year is that, 1923 or 28? That would seem to me, the layperson, that the fire department has authority and responsibility throughout the city for enforcement of the fire code and any threats that may be manifest. So, and aside from whatever the efficacy is of a complaint-based system for enforcement of fire hazard, that doesn't seem, 6 instances, there's still an awful lot of fuel sitting out there. Notwithstanding what's right behind City Hall here, or across from City Hall, or actually, now that I think about it, on all 4 directions from City Hall. I've been asking this question now for a couple of years. It's everything I read indicates that it's Ventura County Fire Department that has authority and responsibility for enforcement of the fire code, and specifically combustible fuel aggregation, stockpiles, within the city.
Is the question on the process or the enforcement? Because I'm not clear on what you're asking.
The process, enforcement's just part of the process. So my question on that is, I've gotten, and that was, once again, that was that from Captain Potke, that the observation that it's the building official or code compliance that is responsible for mitigation of combustible fuel stockpiles in the city?
There's 2 ways to enforce it, and I'm going to have Larry Williams explain the 2 ways. It falls into 2 different programs. I guess that's maybe a clearer way to explain it. If we give Larry the opportunity to explain Ventura County's process, maybe that will answer the questions. Can we allow him to explain
great.
that?
Yeah, certainly.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Save us a lot of questions and are
So we,
going to be asked correctly.
We have this situation in the 6 cities that we serve that are part of the fire district. Ojai, Thousand Oaks, Moore Park, Simi, Camarillo, and Port Hueneme, even though they don't have any wildland-urban interface. We have the Fire Hazard Reduction Program, or FHRP, that I manage. It's a program that's been in existence for decades. It has a very good response, and it's been recognized of our ability to reduce the hazards for the defensible space, which is it's referred to now. We have a scope and objectives of that program. What is it intended to be for? And it's for that wildland-urban interface zones. And basically, where we look at parcels that are either in the SRA, the LRA, very high severity zone, or in what we define as a hazardous fire area, which is typically a 500-foot distance to the contiguous wildland areas. Those 3 areas are typically within the scope of our program. Every once in a while, we may have a large parcel that, based on its terrain, its fuels, the weather conditions, could result in being considered a fire hazard beyond what would normally be expected. We can add those in too. It's not the intent of our program to go down into the middle of the cities, all 6 of those cities, and do small lots just because they have weeds on them, or they may have some dead grass brush or a dead tree on it. Those parcels normally fall, they can be deemed a public nuisance, but those parcels typically would fall in a city's code enforcement program and handled as an abatement. The city has a process allotted to them under the government code for that, and as Renee had mentioned, they had used that option for those parcels that aren't included in our program, that in the areas surrounding the city or in those those designated areas. The reason for the SRA, the LRA very severity zones is because there's actually government codes and public resource codes that indicate that people shall maintain their properties in those conditions. The enforcement aspect of the maps is where my unit comes in. We are now the enforcement part of making sure we do the annual noticing of the properties, we do the annual inspections. Majority of it's done by the local fire stations. My unit does remote areas where we don't want to take an engine company out of service to go do these. I have staff that will go do those remote areas. If someone doesn't comply, there's additional process we do. Our ultimate goal is to get the person to do the work, to educate them to understand it, so they will do it, so we don't have to use the ultimate process, which is a forced abatement by the fire department. Ultimately, if someone does not complete their work, we will put our contractor on the property, we will clear it, and the contractor's charges plus the district's administrative fee then gets placed on the tax bill and is collected just like the taxes. This year, we sent out over 16,000 notices countywide in our jurisdiction, and we only had to clear less than 20 parcels. We get an excellent compliance rate. The number of abatements has gone down. We attempt to find the people and get them to do the work, and then continue to do the work so we don't have to do it, each year on them. So for small little parcels, because that question came up earlier this year,
excuse me, Mr. Williams. I don't believe anyone's had a question regarding smaller parcels, because clearing weeds or a particular stand of dead trees hasn't been the issue that we've been concerned about for at least a couple of years. We've been talking to Chief McNeil about large combustible fuel stockpiles that are throughout the city. So the question I think that was posed was, does County Fire and the Ventura County Fire Protection District been addressing any of those stockpiles within the city?
Well, again, we have for some parcels in the city, if they're within the 3 zones that I mentioned. But if we're down, like example, along,
in other words, what's on the fire map?
What's in the red zone on your map?
Yes.
And there are some other areas that are in what we consider the hazardous fire area, which is about a 500-foot boundary from the contiguous wildland areas. That can fall within our program. There is some parcels, we have those exhibits that we can present at another time. That information is available that shows what parcels are currently included in our program within the city and in the other
that would be really
other
important
areas.
Because if it follows the fire maps, then it misses a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm not aware of some of these large parcels that have been addressed in meetings and from various meetings of city council or the city building appeals board that have been addressed. So, or have been addressed within the last several years. So the concern at this point is what there is now, and then of course what we can do about it without undue delay. I've heard now twice, wait till.
If I could speak to that.
We were very fortunate to dodge things, obviously. You guys had a lot to do with that, but so did the wind and it changing directions or dying. So the bottom line at this point is the threat that I feel to the city, and I think this is shared by several of my board members, remains, and at this point, it still is not clear who's responsible for processing and enforcement, because it hasn't been done. So, I mean, if it's somebody else, great. We still need to know who's going to be doing it in the near term, or how we can help get it done in the near term.
If I could speak to some of your sure. points that you did. First of all, in regards to your point about stockpiles of fuel within parcels within the city, under our regulations, anything over 100 foot from the structure, there's no requirement for them to remove it. We're dealing with that defensible space zone, which is 100 foot from the structure. Now, the fire district is more restrictive than the state. State law only requires the property owner to clear the 100 foot or whatever portion is on their property to the property line. Fire district, we look at the full 100 foot. So if you have a property with a house and it's only 30 feet to the property line, that property owner has to do the 30 feet. If the adjacent property is vacant, state law says they don't have to do anything. Fire district ordinance requires that property owner to complete the remainder of that 100-foot clearance, and it has been that way for decades. So we're more restricted in that aspect to get that 100 foot, but we cannot go beyond the 100 foot for clearing. So it could have a large fuel load. Example, the parcel behind the city here. There's a large barranca, there's a lot of fuel, but anything outside 100 foot from the structures, we cannot, from the fire district, enforce any requirements. That would be something that...
If there's a stand of Mexican fan palms that haven't been trimmed in, 10 years, if there's a stand of eucalyptus that have also not been cleared, if there's a stand of dead pine trees, which we've had several of those, some of them have been removed and some of them haven't, that is, and they're all within 100 feet of a structure. Who's responsible for addressing that?
Again, each property you look at, and based on what the hazard is, we're looking at the brush, we're looking at the grasses. When it comes to stands of trees, of existing trees, it was not the intent of the requirement to go in and start clear cutting trees. There is a requirement that allows single specimen, but if we applied that single specimen requirement, we'd be clearing oak groves throughout the whole county. That is not the intent of it. And there's also issues of ornamental vegetation. At what point does ornamental vegetation need to be cleared from properties? We're trying to look at that and trying to come up with requirements so people will not plant, stands of trees. But it's not the intent of the ordinances or the requirements to go in and start clear cutting. So if I have a stand of eucalyptus trees, now within reason, we have people limb up their trees, remove the dead wood that they can easily get to, and prevent from ladder fuels from going up and into those trees there. And you had quite a few others when we got off track on that. But as far as who's responsible for enforcement, if the parcels fall within the scope of our program, the fire district will do the inspection, will do the enforcement. If the parcels do not fall within the scope of our program, that's where the city's public nuisance program would come into play, and they would handle it through their process.
Let's do some specifics so we can make it really simple. And I don't expect you to know geography here in town. We have a long stretch running south out of town. We have some very long lots. It runs down to the riparian area. We have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of fallen trees that are quite massive areas, quite thick. We're not talking about removing single species, live trees, any of those. Where do we get help with that massive accumulation of fuel? What is available for cities that have that, where it presents a pretty tough we're looking at hazard. What is hazard again? That's the amount, right? We're not looking at the risk, we're looking at the hazard. That hazard is extreme. Where do we get help with removing that hazard?
Well, one thing I will comment on your question, in regards to what parcels are included, how do we take care of this in the near term versus the long term? Based on some of the input that was brought out earlier this year, we have started surveying the city in regards to our program and what parcels are included in the program and what parcels we believe meet the requirements that should be included in the program. The start of that was after the time of the public hearing that we do each year for the new parcels. So we've been working on that, and then there was a break for doing that because we couldn't legally enforce anything on it without going through that formal legal process at the beginning of each year. It's done in April and May. I actually was just looking at the list the Monday this fire started to see what areas I needed to go back and re-look at some areas just to fine-tune the list, but we are surveying the Ojai area, both inside the city limits and some of the area outside, and there'll be some parcels included in the program that have been missed before that were not included. So that's ongoing work. So in the near term, that will help. As far as the areas you're concerned with, specifically down here, some of those parcels were probably not in the program. They'll get at it. We'll look at it. The down and dead fuels, again, if it's within 100 feet, we can require the property owner to remove those fuels. Anything outside the 100 foot, we can't do anything with.
Okay, could Chief McNeil has my email address, could you shoot me an email of where the statutes that limit things like that are, so I can understand it?
Sure.
And then also, okay, but I still, and I'm not clear on it. You make reference to you made several times reference to parcels that are included in the program. The fire hazard map, as generated by CAL FIRE, produces a hazard depiction based on fuels that are adjacent or within, as the case may be. Most of that red zone seems to be, on the north, seems to include a lot of paved streets and tracks, and not a lot of combustible fuel zones. On the south side, it's quite the opposite. So, having said that, I'm still having a disconnect regarding if the county fire protection district is responsible for the entire city, and the high fire hazard map indicates that there are areas of high fire hazard that are not specific to a 100-foot clearance from any specific structure. It has an entire swath. How is it that that can be somehow not in the program without obviating the purpose or the intent?
I'm getting a little lost with your question there. And I think possibly CAL FIRE can speak to how the maps are created, because when these maps were developed, they were using modeling and other factors to develop those initial maps and then input from the local jurisdiction. So I think that would be good for them to explain how the maps were originally developed. Yes, I think in agreement the maps need to be looked at. It's time to update them. That's a process that goes through the state. But from the local agency, the fire district, yes, the city's in the fire district, but we have areas that we look at and say, this is a fire hazard and it falls within the scope of our program, or this is a public nuisance that falls in the scope that the city code enforcement should be handling. And we even define that, a fire hazard in our ordinance. We get a lot of calls from people, just, there's a dead tree, it's a fire hazard. Well, it may not necessarily be a fire hazard. So our focus is on the wildland interface areas of where the wildland can come through and where the people truly should have that defensible space. If it's just someone who just hasn't cleared the weeds around the property or something, that's more of a nuisance, an eyesore, something like that.
We're not talking about that.
We go to the city.
Yeah.
But that question was asked about within the city. Even though it's in the district, we would give that to the city code enforcement to handle.
Okay, and have you gotten anything like that from them?
She said they have had 6 parcels that they identified and took care of.
Well, that was they identified. I'm talking about what came from county fire.
We don't send those parcels to the city. If someone contacts us, we refer them to the appropriate code enforcement agency.
Okay,
because each agency has a different process of how they receive those.
But in the city, that would be the building official, code enforcement officer.
City code enforcement at whatever.
Okay, so my question was then that you haven't sent anything over, at least in the last year, or
we ourselves do not send it to the city. If someone calls us, we refer the public to contact the city, because again, each jurisdiction has a different process of how they handle it.
Okay.
So we want them to make that contact.
Okay. Very good. You have anyone?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question.
Real quick, can I just remind the board that the item on the agenda is the CAL FIRE map, and I know enforcement is related, but we're kind of straying off that.
And we're going to try to get back.
And if I could just recommend, while we have CAL FIRE here from Sacramento, Larry and I will spend as much time as we need to discuss the local aspect of it, our weed abatement or fire hazard reduction program on the local level. Is there some type of relationship to the map discussion? I think there is, but I would just recommend giving more time to the CAL FIRE folks and focus in on the state map, and then we can have follow-up conversations at the local level is what I would recommend. and I'm willing to do that, whatever's convenient.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, member of the board, if I can just add to a couple things. It seems like we're getting off track somewhat about the maps, and that was the whole intent. This is great discussion. This is great dialogue. I commend the city of Ojai for looking at these issues for the hazards. And to address Member Hanson made the comment of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, or the Fire Safe Council is new and established. I think that's a great starting point. I also look at, and Chairman Ulrich mentioned that the city of Ojai, for lack of better terms, dodged the bullet. I look at education, engineering, and enforcement for the local jurisdiction, as well as information that is provided. Looking at the code enforcement aspect, as well as enforcement, that the Ventura County Fire Department did their due diligence. But we also look at fuels reduction as part of that component, hazard reduction, defensible space inspections, and also wildland fire preparedness. So working in the cooperation with the Ventura County Fire Department and that partnership, that I think the city of Ojai, it's a success story, and I think you all would agree with that. But I think now is the time to move forward, to get back to the questions that board member Dottie had, as well as Mr. Ulrich. The fact is, do you have the ability to be more restrictive? And that answer is yes. However, I can't speak for the local jurisdiction. There would probably have to be some discussions that take place with the board, and as you mentioned, with the city council. What we've seen in other parts of the state of California is identifying that risk and doing an internal risk assessment, working in conjunction with the planning department, the building department, and the county officials and the fire department, and to determine that risk and how they're going to move forward. It's something that probably will not take, will not happen overnight. It's probably a decision and more discussions. The representatives from the land use planning program can certainly assist in that process. Going back to the Firewise Council, I think, as I mentioned, is a good starting point. The young lady today gave the initial presentation with the Nature Conservancy, as well as doing field modifications. That's an excellent member to be part of that team, to get that input, to have people that are champions for the cause. And I would venture to say there are numerous champions and stakeholders within the city of Ojai that can assist with this process. And I think that now is a good time. You mentioned there's smoke in the air. The firefighters did an excellent job. They're still on the lines. We look at the big picture of, I mentioned the safety element of the general plan, incorporating mitigation strategies in the safety element of the general plan to reduce large-scale disasters from happening in the future. We also look at legislation with the local hazard mitigation plans, working with the county of Ventura. Another component could also be a community wildfire protection plan, and have a nexus between those three documents and have that as a baseline for the future. So if you look at a baseline for the future for new development, we look at the maps, whether they're restrictive or you adopt the current CAL FIRE map. It provides a baseline for the fire marshals as well as the building officials to incorporate mitigation measures, as I mentioned before, to reduce those impacts. Fires do not have a geographical boundary. It could be from the county, a city, an adjoining city. And you look at what transpired the last couple of weeks. You had a wildland urban interface with aggressive fuels reduction, code enforcement. It reduced that potential of going from property to property, parcel to parcel, changing fuel type and going from house to house ignition. We've seen that in the past, and unfortunately we will probably see it again. So this is the opportunity for everybody to work collectively with the fire department and address those maps. There's multiple components and multiple documents, but the representatives from the Office of the Fire Marshal are available to assist.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a question?
Everybody's got questions.
Mine is quick. I'm sure that the Cal State Fire and all the fire departments must use the GIS maps.
Yes.
But do they use them on large parcels? Last night at our city council, we had a person speak. He has, I don't know, 20 acres, I don't know how many acres, but a large parcel. And the firemen that were there were really happy that he stayed on to identify where different areas of his property were. And I just wondered, you wouldn't have specific GIS maps for larger parcels so that you would just know that? Or is that asking too much?
I'll try to answer the best of my ability. I would rely on the local jurisdiction, whether it's a city, if they had a GIS technician, or if they have contract services available with a third party, or maybe having that data, that census data from the county census in Ventura County, for an example. They would probably have that specific information. It would be different in each jurisdiction.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty
Another
much.
source could possibly be the Office of Emergency Services for the state of California, as well as a local jurisdiction, Emergency Management Department, Emergency Management
But
Division.
it wouldn't be something that the firemen on the land would have access to through any,
I think that would
Central.
vary throughout the state.
okay.
Some
Well, I know in Rose Valley, we have a little ranch up in Rose Valley, and I was up there a couple of times, and the firemen at that time had a geographical representation of all the tributaries on our ranch and all that. So, yes, they did have
Sometimes,
access to it.
They
I
did
think
it.
they have the ability, yes, thank you for bringing that up. I think it all based on the jurisdiction, what they have, what their IT department has, the connectivity issues, what layers they're using, how they obtain those layers. The data is there.
And also, since they're oftentimes in a big fire, there's a lot of out-of-area, out-of-state departments that are responding mutual aid. I don't think they're connected up, because I think there's several, I've heard this anecdotally, that there were, like you said, good thing if the owner was on the property to be able to direct folks to where they could access, because otherwise they might not have been able to.
Right, no,
Because
that's
of
a good point.
unfamiliarity, so.
Can you help me correlate? And I'm probably going to be mixing goats and sheep, and it's not going to work. What I'm hearing is we have certain jurisdictions that really limit us to 100 feet of a structure and certain property lines. We have some properties that are very large properties, are very, very heavy with brush. My understanding, and I think what my intent is by taking a look at the map. What the map does, in my opinion, is it helps us harden homes through more restrictive fire codes. Okay. Soffits, exterior wood, Santa Clarita's done a great job with hardening their entire community. If we're not able to extend the fire map, which allows us to harden, can the city harden on their own, or do we really need to rely on the map to be able to get rid of class, make different changes is what I'm looking for. The fire map is very easy. If you're in a high fire zone, go to CAL FIRE. It's got a litany of different things that are suggested or demanded, and it really helps. Where we have these very large lots and we have these properties that have an immense amount of fuel and laddering and dead, I'm not talking about live anything, they're outside the 100 foot from that particular structure. Is there a way for us to get a mandatory mitigation and removal on, I mean, we got a 4-acre parcel that's incredibly heavy, and they're going to be 100 feet away from everything. And so I'm just wondering, what do we do with that fuel? Because it doesn't stop at the street or the property line or the neighborhood. And with the winds we had, it just, that ember shower inundates us. What is the best way to go about attacking that? Through CAL FIRE, the map, through the city? How best do we protect ourselves?
That's an excellent question. I can give you a response that may be somewhat generic. I don't want to speak on behalf of the local jurisdiction. I think it could be a partnership. A starting point could be the Fire Safe Council for the city of Ojai. That could be a possibility. And I'll give you some examples of what we've seen throughout the state of California. Maybe in an example, working with your local Fire Safe Council and having an adopted, completed CWPP that talks about fuel reduction projects, mitigation measures as a form of clearing brush, doing vegetation management burns, also doing some type of mastication and removing that fuel, mulching that fuel on site. This would probably be a great opportunity to work with local landscaping groups, conservatory groups, to see how to recycle that mulch, as an example, is what we've seen in different parts of California. As far as the maps, I think there are a couple different issues. As I mentioned with the maps, it establishes that baseline to look at codes. If we look at the model codes from the California Building Code and how they were adopted at the local jurisdiction, there's the opportunity for that authority having jurisdiction to be more restrictive on those model codes that are established in what we have now is 2016 Chapter 7A. Also, looking at those maps as that baseline, looking at those requirements in Chapter 49 of the California Fire Code also refers to those maps. So there's a number of components. The maps are extremely important. As far as getting into the details and the models, as Mr. Williams mentioned, basically to summarize, it's fuel, weather, topography, and embercast goes into those maps. We look at them as a case-by-case basis in certain jurisdictions. The state of California as a whole, and the SRA and the LRA, and the cities that have been identified as areas at risk. But we also look at those, as I mentioned, as a safety element. We look at working with the planning departments and the local fire officials. We look at incorporating mitigation strategies, mitigation measures, recommendations from the Board of Forestry to incorporate as goals, policies, and implementation measures with measurable results in the future. We also have a component that we look at based on legislation when a local hazard mitigation plan is updated. That triggers a review of the safety element. We have the opportunity to work with the local jurisdictions to revise that safety element, whether it's something on the operations side, something on the fuel modification side, or it's on the building code side, a number of issues that we look at. And again, it's to reduce the large-scale disasters. It's fresh in our mind, Santa Rosa. We look at the stats. I think in 2 years, the state of California looking at loss of structures destroyed is over 15,000. And it will probably continue. There could be a number of factors. Climate change could be an example. So the discussions that were taking place here are good discussions. And we are available to assist the city of Ojai and the Ventura County Fire Department in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Better.
So on the fire map for Ojai, we just have the very high fire hazard severity zones. Is there mapping for high and moderate somewhere at the state level or the local level? I mean, because there should be a gradient going from very high to moderate.
Absolutely. And you have to forgive me, I'm not familiar with the local geography for the city of Ojai, but there are maps that exist. A lot of times what we will look at is a point of reference when we work with the jurisdiction. We'll look at the most recent adopted general plan. We will look at that safety element of the general plan to establish the baseline. When we incorporate our mitigation strategies and mitigation measures, the maps are just one component, but we build off that. There were some discussions earlier this evening about post-fire impacts, debris flow. That's a component that we look at in a local hazard mitigation plan. We'd also assist the Fire Safe Council with incorporating that in the community wildfire protection plan, but also in the safety element of the general plan. So there's multiple, as I mentioned, the fire prevention component, working with the engineering, but also post-fire, and also looking at existing non-conforming. So the discussions that were taking place this evening regarding the code enforcement, that could be an element that the city may want to look at for doing a redevelopment of a particular area, for example. It may be something that the building department may look at for in the form of an ordinance if a certain percentage of the dwelling is rehabbed or a tenant improvement of a commercial building, that they incorporate the most recent adopted standards, something to that effect. So those are general. A lot of my responses, I have to apologize, are at the 10,000 foot level. We assist jurisdictions from Sacramento to Mexico. I believe it's 116 cities and 23 counties that we assist with the general plan and planning to reduce the impacts of large-scale disasters occurring in the future. So I hope I got down to the local jurisdiction with my response.
So our safety element is the one that determines the high and the moderate zones?
It's a component. That would be an after. So the state of California has the base map, for example.
This is the base
This
map.
would be the base map that was produced in 2010, I believe. I think
Produced in 2007, adopted in 2010.
Okay. And I believe it went out, notification went out to the city of Ojai October 8th, 2010, are the records that we have. So in around those timeframes, they're going to fluctuate with the public hearings and so forth. But yes, that would be a component. It would be a recommendation from the Board of Forestry to include a map that's been identified to the state of California.
And then once the city has looked at the very high fire hazard severity zone and our safety element establishes high and moderate, then we're supposed to go through a local adoption of the map?
It is recommended, yes. It is recommended. And it provides, as I mentioned, it provides that baseline. So it keeps on building and building, and each document, whether it's approved by council or the board or the planning commission, there's a nexus and they complement one another. So the goal would be, as I mentioned, a community wildfire protection plan, a general plan, and a local hazard mitigation plan. There would be parallels in multiple areas, multiple mitigation strategies to reduce the impacts. And that's all we're looking at, is to reduce those impacts, as I mentioned. And we look outside, there's a perfect example. We're trying to reduce that from happening in the future.
But right now, under the applicability of this map, there would be certain elements of the fire code and the California Fire Code and certain elements of the California Building Code that should be applicable to any new construction within or adjacent to the very high fire severity hazard zone.
The way the fire code is listed, Chapter 49, Chapter 70, that is correct.
Okay. And is that something that we've been enforcing in the city?
Since I've been here, when anybody applies for additional square footage of a building, we send them to the Ventura County Fire for 126 form, and that is one of the things that they look for, is the review on whether that building needs to comply with high fire hazard severity zone, Chapter 7A.
Okay. But has that been a lot of folks, permits-wise?
No.
Because for the most part, we're not.
Slow growth?
No growth.
No growth.
No growth. Usually the few permits, that come in, they're sort of like everything else. They kind of sort of come in.
I certainly support your decision.
So, okay, anybody else?
I think you actually spoke to this earlier, but when you were talking about the local authority that has authority over the maps, it's the Ventura County Fire Protection District. And you started to talk about ways that what the city's role or what the city can do to provide input. And I believe you said that a risk assessment was something that the city could do.
Absolutely. That's just a generic term that we use in the planning arena,
Okay.
a risk assessment. So I think part of that has already been done from here in the discussions. I don't know 100% what is going on within the city. Looking at the local factors, current events, hearing some of the discussions, that could be a starting point. Is I think a portion of that has already been identified. The risks, we see it outside, that confirms it. Looking at, there's a number of factors within a risk assessment. Looking at the demographics, for example, that can be a component. Looking at the stakeholders, looking at nonprofit special interest groups, looking at the fire department, collecting a lot of data. So a decision could be made, but I would venture to say there's a lot of work on the back end. And that would, as Captain Potke mentioned, is having that historical data, doing a technical report to substantiate the maps. A lot of times what we see in jurisdictions is a technical report as a supplemental document for that safety element of that general plan. So it all goes back to a local decision, how they want to do it. I'm not sure if I mentioned a housing element, When a housing element comes up for review based on Housing and Community Development Department in Sacramento, it's on a 5-year cycle. At that point, it triggers a review of the safety element, and then we're back to looking at the maps as the first item. So as legislation changes, the overall intent, as I mentioned, is to reduce those impacts. With legislation, we're focusing on planning as one component to reduce the impacts. But at the end of the day, we can't do it alone. We need the assistance from the community, whether it's in the form of compliance with defensible space inspections, elected officials such as yourselves, groups, community wildfire protection groups, firewise groups, the fire department, code enforcement, to move it forward. And we can assist you with that.
We're merely appointed officials. We serve at the pleasure of the city council. But thank you very much for the upgrade.
And we recommend, I have a question, Chair.
Mr. Vega, if you review California Government Code 51-177, local agency means the city as well as the district responsible for fire protection, and I think somewhere along in here there's going to be a resolution recommending to the city council that we initiate that joint effort with county fire.
That's one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of.
I am concerned that that we do something before, and I think my fellow board members share this. We do something before the next iteration of the Cal Fire Map comes out, because it's going to be a heck of a lot more accurate, generated by the local folks, number one, and also, and perhaps I'm being overly optimistic here, we'd be able to develop something also a little more timely than what might come out of Sacramento. So,
and if I can add, that could be perfect timing. Doing the legwork with the city and your stakeholders to provide at least that baseline. Maybe the city decides to utilize consulting services from a third party just to have that validation component. That's certainly a decision that would be for the local jurisdiction.
We actually have some really good talent in that regard. Retired Forest Service and fire service folks who are in some of these organizations. So they've indicated their willingness to help. So
you're on the right track. Those are your champions and those are your stakeholders. I would certainly give them a call.
There we go. Very good. Anything
Just
else?
quickly, one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure I understood that clearly, and I don't think it affects the ultimate goal, but I'm reading the government code, and it says that the local agency is the city, county, or district responsible for fire protection. And it's an or, not an and. So I read it as the fire district is the local authority. Is that correct, or is it the district and the city?
I think it may be synonymous. I interpret it as a cooperative approach. The lead agency, if we refer to it as the planning department, or the fire department as the authority having jurisdiction, I think looking at it from other areas that we've seen in the state of California is that's where the discussions need to take place in that agreement. Whether you interpret the government code a certain way, what we've seen in the past, it has been very successful as that cooperative effort with the fire department, the city, or the county, elected officials and appointed officials.
Is there any mechanism that can be used? I mean, I've read this thing 20 times till it's alphabet soup. Probability, fire behavior, all the definition sections. That's where I'm big on. I believe I saw a section in here where the local authority, which I'll call the city in this instance, can extend that defensible space. Is that correct, to your knowledge? Is that with CAL FIRE? Is that with our local protection force? Where was the place to pursue that? Or is that just simply part of the general plan with the city, where they say the general plan says we're going to have a 300-foot defensible space instead of 100 in certain areas, and then we create our own zone that talks about certain canyons and upslope? Because that's what we're looking at the hazard, not at the risk right now. And the hazard is this enormous fuel buildup. And then when I go into the definitions and it takes a look at it and says,
but has no information regarding asset or resource characterization nor the relative vulnerability to damage, because we have certain areas that we have not had a burn within the city. So we can't go back and give it certain scores and get certain, we can just kind of look at probabilities. We can look at wind areas, and when we look at wind areas, then we're going to look at debris flows, and then when we look at heavy accumulation, when I was in the Forest Service, let's say 50 years ago this month, I was up on the Piru, Fillmore area where that fire just went out. Now, when we actually had free-flowing condors instead of the farm-raised. I guess I can't say that farm-raised. I'll have people yelling at me. But again, I'm trying to figure out what we can do to expand areas in the city if we don't expand the map. How we expand the zone that just says, if you have very heavy fuel in you have a 300-foot upslope, because that's reasonable. I don't want to do what's not reasonable. If it's flat and we don't have any forest, we don't have contiguous, we have nothing on the wildland area, that's unreasonable. But where it's reasonable, how do we go ahead and change that?
I'll give you a generic answer from,
Sure.
from past practice.
Sure.
I think that would start with some discussions with some stakeholders, the fire department. As Board Member Farmer mentioned, the occluded areas in San Diego, how they had those gullies. And the fire marshal's interpretation based on the map, that's a component of it. But I think it goes back to an internal discussion. And having folks, the local residents who are familiar with the local area, such as yourself, 50 years in the fire service, thank you for your
No.
service.
It was 50 years ago I was a kid.
No, but that's key. It's the local history. It's the local history from the fire officials, the local history from fires that have occurred in the last 20 years. That data is available. But collecting that data and analyzing that data, I think, is going to just assist you with that process to validate, to support what you go back to the state of California with in these particular areas. What we've seen, some jurisdictions throughout the state, they receive the maps, just as every jurisdiction received the maps. They had some issues that they want to either include or exclude. They provided documentation with substantial evidence to support their case to the state of California. They retained that information as public record. They incorporated that in their local hazard mitigation plan, and that way there was documentation of why they included it. However, areas that they included, that map was not changed on the state website. It remained the way it was posted. However, that local jurisdiction working with GIS at the local level, they were able to add those additional areas based on their evidence to either extend. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's incredibly important, because what it does is it actually allows for different components on construction and remodels. It adds for extra components for extra safety.
Absolutely.
In those areas, and that's really the bottom line. That's really the reason to get to this, is to get that extra safety.
And you know as well, being in the fire service for a number of years, is looking at incidents that occur throughout the state, whether it's the time of year. There simply are resources are limited, I should say. Resources may be coming from a considerable distance if they're committed. Let's say in a jurisdiction in the sphere of influence of the city of Ojai, multiple fires, resources will be limited, and the resources that will be coming in to protect will be coming from a considerable distance. So we also look at that as a component as well in a local hazard mitigation plan, as well as a safety element. Have those impacts been addressed? What are ways that the local jurisdiction can work to reduce those impacts? Just another item. So there's multiple components, but I think you folks are on the right track, identifying that risk, as I mentioned earlier. And what we've seen that has been successful throughout the state is establishing a group. You're on the right track with the Firewise Council for the City of Ojai, and then continuing on that momentum. And you can feel free to give us a call. We're here to help you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Did any of you gentlemen want to add anything to that comment, presentation-wise? Anything else?
Chair, I think a number of people thought the meeting started at 7 because we had the crowd tripled at 7 o'clock.
Okay.
And maybe some of those folks have got some input they'd like to step forward if you.
There's that possibility.
If this is timely.
Would anyone, we're going to be informal here relative to the speaker's cards. It'd be nice if you filled one out if you'd like to speak, but we'll get you on tape one way or another. Does anyone care to comment, speak? The mayor. And Building Appeals Board liaison, as I understand it, from the council.
Right.
Okay.
I normally watch this from home, in the comfort of my own home.
With some popcorn, I would presume.
Right.
Yes.
I just want to thank you folks, Bob in particular, because he has bugged me for a long time, as to the importance of this, and events overtook us. So we ended up with not just a drill, but the real life thing. But last night, after the council meeting, I want to thank CAL FIRE and the fire district. I don't know if any of you were here. I didn't run into anybody because it was like midnight, 1 o'clock. And the service that this town got, because these folks are here, Sparks, Nevada, Tahoe, people from everywhere, were down there and took care of that, and we can't thank you folks enough for what you have done, and also to express condolences for Corey Iverson's, who gave his life protecting Ventura County. So anyway, thank you folks, and thanks to all the fire guys.
Hear, hear. Okay.
Anyone else? Nick, Vicki, anybody? You're here for a reason. Mr. Quillisi, Chair.
Thank you, Steve Quillisi, West Eucalyptus Street in the city. I'm one of those that thought the meeting was at 7, and I apologize for being late. I find it interesting that we only have 2 zones in the city, big risk and no risk, if you look at the map. That's what it says to me. I'm glad to be in the no-risk area, but I don't think I really am. And I'm wondering when the time comes that we make some simple changes in the city's ordinances and building standards so that, for example, we no longer put wood shingle roofs on new houses. I mean, how dumb is that? And yet it's allowed. And I'm in the middle of a remodel right now. I'm finally getting my Class A shingles over my plywood, but I would have been a lot happier if it had been done 2 weeks ago. And I think that we need to do whatever we can through the city council and with their approval, obviously, to make any new construction or remodeling of homes here at least conform to Class A roofs and whatever the corresponding standards are for exterior walls. I'm getting stucco, so I think I'm safe. But there's going to be a lot of wood out there exposed to what the gentleman called ember cast. And I think that's probably our biggest concern right now. Most of the fuel's gone from around the city, but embers are going to come from anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, I'd like to ask another question, because Mr. Quillisi brought this up, and I'm not sure which one of our fire people could best answer this. With the 2007 map, we had a number of communities in Southern California, and I'll use Pasadena as an example. I've sent that example into the city many times. What Pasadena says is by the year 2010, all wood shingle structures within the city must be abated, and we don't have any more. Now, I know we have laws for landmarked, we have Mills Act structures, we have certain sites of merit that are allowed to keep those. What is the best way for us to go about putting a sunset to where everybody really needs to conform? Class C is and you know that, the people at home don't, that is the size of an ember of a nickel that will withstand a fire for 15 minutes. A Class A is 2.5 clay bricks that will withstand a fire for 2 hours. And so the most hardened home 5 feet off the property line is the most vulnerable home with a Class C roof in this ember shower. And so I'm wondering if anybody out there has a way or a thought about how a city goes ahead and sunsets what I consider to be extremely hazardous roofs.
In regards to building construction requirements, the fire district, there are certain limits of what's within our jurisdictional boundaries to recommend for more restrictive. But when it comes to the roofing material like that, your best bet would be working with your building official, working on a city ordinance or resolution that would be more restrictive when you adopt your building code to restrict the type of roofs. And if the city wishes to pass a ordinance requiring retrofit, to go through that process. But your best bet would be through your city building code adoption process.
And so council can go ahead and adopt ordinances that does the mandatory retrofit. We don't have to, with all the layers of this stuff, that's something really local that the city can do.
Yes, you can do that as a local jurisdiction that adopts it. You just can't be less restrictive than the state minimum building standards.
Right. Thank you.
Can I say something, Bill?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess the fire down in San Gabriel between Verdugo Mountains back in, you could probably answer a question, Central La Cañada, they designated that as a donut fire in that fire zone. And the city's solution to that at that time, in all fairness for the building codes, they said it didn't make sense to try to delineate who would have to comply with the fire codes or not. They just did the whole entire city. So it wasn't influenced by lessons of the fire that destroyed nearly 2,900 homes in Berkeley. In a wind-driven fire, it's not going to stop at that zone, Stanley said. It's going to drive right through. So
we have conditions like that.
Yeah.
So, okay, I also have a question now, and perhaps this is for Mr. Williams. One of the responses on question 10, which made reference to Government Code Section 51-187, and the response made reference to Government Code Section 38-771 regarding what constitutes a nuisance. And Government Code 38-771, the response indicates that allows the city to declare what constitutes a nuisance. However, the district defines a public nuisance per Ordinance 30, W102. What's the W for? Public nuisance. A declaration by the fire code official that the presence of combustible material on a parcel creates a fire hazard. So to use that example of within the city limits, a 4-acre parcel that is heavily forested, shall we say, with native chaparral and some specimen trees, but may maintain the 100-foot clearance around structures, but still it's between one street to another. It's actually a bridge, and so you're, for all intents and purposes, you're talking about 3.5 acres of what appears to be wildland. Is that something that can be declared a nuisance? And who would do it?
And with that in mind, this particular property is located at the top of a hill. There would be an ember cast that would prevent dozens of homes uphill attempting to get down the street with the same northeast wind that we had. They would not be able to evacuate using the single street. So
Okay, well, I'm going to speak to it more in a generic, because again, in order, as far as our ordinance, that section W is the appendix, chapter W of our district ordinance, which is our fire hazard reduction program. Basically, that's the basis for how we manage that program, the noticing process, and the requirements, and also the ultimate enforcement and tax, putting it on the tax bill if they don't do it. In regards to that parcel, again, we would have to evaluate each parcel independently to determine, does it fall within the scope of our program? Then we would include it, and they'll get a notice, but we'll only be able to go out to the 100-foot distance, because that's the limit that we're allowed to enforce.
So then that means it's the city then would be declaring a nuisance from the perspective of
the city.
Those same considerations regarding hazard in the combustible fuel stockpile conditions.
Yeah, so if the city wishes to also declare a parcel a public nuisance or a nuisance parcel because it's beyond the scope of what we would typically enforce, the city by all means has the ability to do that. So in conjunction between the two, then you might be able to get the full parcel cleared. That's something you would have to look at. If there is a specific parcel, then just provide that information to it, and we can evaluate, determine should that parcel be included and should be receiving a notice, and how much of that parcel would be cleared based on the proximity to structures, not just the property lines, but to actual structures.
Thank you.
Okay, so that seems to indicate that the city has the authority, and that's kind of congruent with what I'm seeing here.
Well, then we need to refer the city a few parcels, have them look at it, and then
determine whether the city has the will.
Then we can figure out how that particular start works.
Okay.
And how we can coordinate with you.
Okay.
And you'll educate us and say, hey, we can do this, and we can't do that. And then at least we understand what our limits are. But it hasn't been attempted in more than 2 decades I've been here.
Mm-hmm.
That thing hasn't been cleared for my whole lifetime, I'm sure.
Again, we'd have to find out what parcel is, and that information could be provided to us at a later time.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Then have another speaker.
Okay. There's another member of the public who'd like to speak.
Nick.
I had 3, but I didn't get the third one written down. But I'll remember it before I'm through. Nick Ojai, I'm an architect, local, and I heard you just talk about replacing or mandating replacing roofs that are wood. And several people will be under hardship in that regard, because to put a heavier roof on, or more substantial roof, means rebuilding the whole structure, or substantially rebuilding the whole structure. So considering something like that will be an automatic fire uproar from the public, at least I'm guessing. Also clearance, I'm wondering, is there any federal, state, or monies? I mean, we can go and, pardon my, but we can spend a lot of money on other parts of the world, but we should be able to have money to help people clear, because there's been a lot of discussion this evening about clearing brush, clearing trees that are dying, things. I mean, you can go down Creek Road and it's, kind of a mess. You just realize that that thing is just like a no-brainer. And you go down the Ojai Santa Paula Road, and I'm helping a couple of people rebuild up there. I mean, that place is just, looks like a war zone. And the Creek Road could easily have been the same thing, with a lot of dead wood. Is there any way of us as local community sources asking for federal relief or state relief to help people clear? Because there's one piece of, just my own property, I know I'm trying to raise the funds just to make one piece of property free of, but not everybody has the resources to clear all this brush. It's an
Nick, let me.
expensive operation.
What I'll do is, CAL FIRE's been terrific. A few months ago, I asked them to send me a website about fuel reduction money, grants, drought and disease funds.
Okay.
And so
That
I'll
answers-
send that to you. You can look at that, and then maybe together, you and I can convince the city to get somebody to write a grant for some of that money, or the county.
Okay.
All of those people up in the fire area, I'll tell you how that works. I've got 14 total losses. And so those people that are on the larger parcels that have established trees, not coyote bushes, none of that kind of stuff, we're paying $750 for every tree that has been burned. And that's,
You mean the city?
I'm talking about my insurance company for our insurance risks.
Oh, okay.
We're actually paying $750 for each tree. And
That gets removed.
It gets removed, correct.
Uh-huh.
And that's to help with the debris removal. And so there is some money to take care of that. Replanting's different, but they're compensated for the loss of shrubs, up to 5% of the value of the home, and they're compensated for up to 5% for trees, and that includes the removal. So,
Okay.
that's a significant amount of money for some people to remove those dead snags everywhere.
And that's just in the area that has been burned, or?
That's in the area where we've had structural or some type of damage to the actual parcel.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, but of course, there are large areas that weren't touched. I mean, we watched a quarter of a mile away or several hundred yards away with fire on three sides of us, but we weren't touched by the fire. But oh my God. Oh, I remember the third thing. The third thing is wouldn't it be easy enough for everybody with a pond or a pool or a body of water on their property to require them to have a pump? My wife has been after me for 2 or 3 years at least, probably longer. Would you get a pump for the pool? Because we have some dear friends who went through the Matilaha Canyon fire with fire. Literally, they could almost reach out and touch the flames. And because they had a pond, not a pool, but a pond, that they used to access the water, they saved their house. And right across the street, everything is gone. So water does help. And what cost? That's not a huge cost to have a 3/4 horsepower pump or something to get that water up. And I know I would have loved to have had it, even though I didn't need it, thank God. But anyway, thank you.
Are you going to get one down there?
Yes.
Yeah, is there anything, anybody else? CAL FIRE, anybody? We're all good? Okay, in that case then, we want to propose a resolution for a recommendation.
So my thoughts for tonight's meeting was to receive the presentation from CAL FIRE and get all of your questions answered. And I was actually thinking, if the board would agree, that on our January meeting, after you have had a chance to mull over what you've learned, come up with any additional questions, that at that meeting you could propose any resolutions, any questions, any items that you would want to bring to council at that point, as opposed to trying to come up with stuff tonight after we've had all this information. It's up to you, but that was my thought process, that tonight would just be a discussion, and that our January meeting, as a result of this, come up with everything that you would like to bring back to council as a result from this meeting.
Well, I'm not opposed to that from the perspective of an incremental approach. I think we're going to be coming up with all sorts of ideas pursuant to a lot of the information we've got, a lot of the information we know, but I would submit that at this point to initiate the process, I would submit that the board resolve to make the recommendation to the city council that we initiate as soon as possible a joint effort with Ventura County Fire Prevention District to revise initiate the process of revising the 2007 CAL FIRE map. It's going to take a while to do that by itself.
So my understanding from the process, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the safety element is where the changes to the map that the city wants to adopt would occur. Is that correct?
That's correct. If the local jurisdiction lead agency makes the determination that they want to be more restrictive, having the most recent adopted map, that would be correct, would be located within the safety element. That way, it'd provide a clear vision to the city and also to the residents, people that may visit for whatever reason and want to take a look at the general plan, especially the safety element, new development, and also, of course, the future fire marshals and building officials to utilize that as a point of reference.
Utilize what? What are we talking about? This map?
An updated map as
that's what I mean.
CBO.
That's what I'm referring to is initiating the update process.
So
as a recommendation to council.
My understanding is we have two options. One is to work on the recommendations to CAL FIRE for updating this map, or the city can initiate a process through its safety element to update our city's current map, add the high fire and the moderate fire zones to the map through this safety element, which would be faster than working on an update with this through CAL FIRE. That was my understanding. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah, well, we want whatever's local at this point to expedite the process and keep it specific to our
So the
condition.
fastest way to do that, my understanding, would be then for the Building Appeals Board to make a recommendation to council to get the Planning Commission to look at this map that's in the safety element.
And that's what we've
wait
seen.
a minute. That's the first time I heard the Planning Commission involved, because my only concern with this is now we're
the Planning Commission wrote the safety element, correct?
Okay, but we're looking at the map. The safety element as a means of processing it, I'm not sure is necessary. So, and where did that come from?
That came from...
And I think that would be a local decision. And my response was...
I don't think that's a requirement.
Exactly. It's
the map lives in the safety element that we adopt?
It could. It's a local decision in...
Right here,
Confused.
regardless, and Mr. Vega and I may have a difference of opinion about interpretation of what "or" signifies, because I think it delineates rather than includes, and that means the city can be work with the fire district responsible for fire protection. It doesn't have to be after the district responsible for fire protection, but at this particular point, my interest is in initiating a process that's going to get this document that is now 10 years old, wasn't valid when it was produced, doesn't correspond to our existing conditions, and get it revised as soon as possible, or at least that process started.
Right, so that's what my understanding was, that it lives in the safety element.
What does lives in?
So that's where this, our local fire map
The city has
exists.
jurisdiction for it according to this section of the government
Correct.
code.
And
Okay?
the city has a safety element, and that's where the map is, that's my understanding based on our conversation.
If that's the process.
And so that's what I'm trying to get to,
Okay.
is the process.
Right.
So my thought is that the BAB makes a recommendation to council, that the Planning Commission gets on this map, maybe in conjunction with the BAB, working together, but that it happens ASAP, because that's where it is.
The reason I'm saying that is because heretofore, until this hearing and this being set up 3 months ago, the only folks that were involved in it, were interested in it, were promoting this, the entire concern, okay, was we're sitting here. So at this point, I want to make the recommendation to the council that it underscored that it proceeds with all due dispatch, and not be otherwise affected by unnecessary filtration.
I wasn't interested in the filtration. I'm just trying to get to the people responsible in this city for adjusting these maps, which my understanding is it's in the safety elements, would be the Planning Commission.
Okay, but I believe that's something for and I know you'll agree with this, something for the council to determine and recommend. I'd rather not include anything unnecessary in the resolution.
So the resolution's just to get the map revised?
That the city work in conjunction with Ventura County Fire Protection District to revise the 2007 CAL FIRE Very High Fire Hazard Zone map as quickly as possible.
Well, what I'm thinking is that there might be, see, if you just say the 2007 CAL FIRE map, I think there's a city map in our safety element, and that's the thing we need to revise ASAP.
If it's different
Right.
than this, great, but this
I'm trying to find the map that we're allowed to revise.
This map is what is posted in the lobby, and this map is what is referred to in city ordinances. And so that's lest there be any confusion and a bureaucratic roadblock. This is what's the subject of this presentation. We've been discussing. If there's a different map that the city has, great.
I just want to make sure the resolution doesn't limit us to this map, that we can get our map done.
And the city map then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman and member of the board, if I can interject one more thing
Absolutely.
to answer the
Interject away.
to answer the CBO's question. The safety element is one area, correct. However, what we've seen in other jurisdictions throughout the state is that can simply go as an agenda item to the Planning Commission and to the City Council for adoption. So you could actually have it in two areas in local ordinance, if that answers your question.
That does answer my question.
Okay,
And
perfect. And also, I'd like to just mention, my responses and my comments were extremely generic from previous experience and past examples throughout the state. However, I don't want to speak for the local jurisdiction. I don't want to speak for Chief McNeil in his jurisdiction. Although we are partners in fire protection and in prevention, I think that, as I mentioned, it's that dialogue that needs to take place with the local jurisdiction, as well as the fire department, as well as the city. So Chief McNeil, I don't want to speak on behalf of Ventura County.
I'm in agreement and in corroboration with
Okay.
See, that from a practical perspective, whenever we've discussed this, and we have discussed this a couple of times in the last couple of years with the chief and other representatives of Ventura County Fire Department and the Fire Protection District, there's been the element of, well, this is what CAL FIRE has produced, because our first thing was it's not accurate. It doesn't represent the conditions, and so at this point, we have now determined that the city can participate in it, and that, I believe, is what our intent and our interest is in, and certainly working with our local district responsible for fire protection. So.
And one last thing. When this was presented to us in 2010, this map, I did call Dave Sapsis, and I said, what is going on with this? And he said, outside contractor did it. We were mandated, and we were behind, and when it got here, the city accepted it and didn't ask. And that's what happened. The city actually, so when it says CAL FIRE produced it incorrectly, no. It was an outside contractor, not CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE accepted it, presented it. The city accepted it at that time. So no blame on CAL FIRE. You guys, I want to make sure that, that is corrected, because I did make the call at that time, and I did talk to Fire Marshal Aragi at that time. I did call him on that fire map. So.
Okay. Yeah. And one thing we'll do as well too is the land use planning program, the umbrella of the Office of State Fire Marshal in Sacramento. Our program has been in place since 2014. When the maps initially were distributed to the local jurisdictions, they did not have the staff available to reconnect with the local jurisdictions. Whether it went to the maps went to the city clerk, the mayor, or the city manager, or their designee. At this point, the process will remain the same. However, our agency reps for the city of Ojai Captain Podkey in the geographic area of Ventura County. We'll have that ability once the maps are released or notification's been made to close that loop with the local jurisdiction, whether it's the planning department, the chief building official, as well as the city representative, and last but not least, the Ventura County Fire Department. So we'll make sure that that notification has been made and that the jurisdiction has received that notification of the map. So that will be the added step within that process that we'll assist you folks with.
Very good. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
Do you need to take a vote on that?
So let me read it back to you to make sure I have it right.
Okay.
So the Building Appeals Board would like to make a recommendation to the City Council to initiate a joint effort between the city and Ventura County Fire Department to revise the city's fire maps.
Okay, the Building Appeals Board would recommend, I think.
That the BAB
Yes, the Building Appeals Board.
represent the city
And-
with the local agency.
Yes.
Okay, wait, I missed that. Recommend the Building Appeals Board represent the city. So initiate a joint effort between the city with the BAB as the city liaison.
We would be, hopefully, because that way we could close the circuit down.
And please spell out the
And,
Building Appeals Board.
Yes.
meet with local fire and,
Okay, initiate a joint effort between the city with the Building Appeals Board as the city liaison with Ventura County Fire to revise the city's fire map.
And I would say Ventura County Fire Department and the Ventura County Fire Protection District. Since those guys always distinguish that anyway.
are we looking for a motion? That is the motion. Are we looking for a second for a vote? I would like to second that for a vote. Dale? Discussion, I guess. I'm sorry, Chair.
Is there a discussion? Or have we already addressed that one?
We did today.
Any discussion? Okay, in that case, call the roll.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
And Chair
Yes.
and myself, yes.
I'd also like to make a motion. We can consider it a resolution that wherever, excepting where there's conflicts in the scheduling or availability or other extraordinary circumstances, that we, Building Appeals Board continues to convene at 6 o'clock. Do I have a second?
I'll second it. Can we have a discussion?
Okay. Discuss.
Well, what would be the purpose of that?
Well, it's 8:15 now.
Yeah, I like meeting early so we get out.
Okay, if
I
that
do like
were-
meeting early
this
so we can
would
get out
be-
early.
Okay. I think that's more convenient to the public, but, assuming they know what time it is.
I'll second. Let's take a vote. Let's
Okay.
move this thing along, guys.
Member Daddy?
Yes.
Member Murphy? Member Farmer? Chair Ulrich?
Yes.
And myself, yes.
Okay.
In building official, I have a request. I would like you to inform us what the best way is to not have a serial meeting and not have chain emails, but would allow us to communicate with you so we can get some ideas on the table and make this thing a much smaller meeting the next time we have, where we've got the ideas out. You can tell us where we can go.
If you send your ideas and questions to me, I can disperse them.
Okay. That, is that acceptable, Chair?
Certainly it's acceptable
And then
to
that
me.
way, we can participate early and get things on the go, and then really move this thing along. And then maybe by that May-April cycle, we will be in cycle for the 2018 May-April or April-May thing. But we're going to have to start now and get on the horse and find out what we can do about meeting with the local fire and the protection and
And the other stakeholders.
well, and you will go ahead and come up with some type of process or procedure that tells us we have to have meetings, we have to have public meetings, we're going to have public input, correct? Or is that only on the CAL FIRE? And is it not on the city fire map?
Public meetings for what?
Do we have to have a city fire, do we have to have a public meeting for input on recommendations to change the city fire map? I know we do on the CAL FIRE, but on the city, and it also says, not only do we have to have the input, but then we have to take it, and then we have to post it, wherever my little
I'll have to check
green
with the city
highlight
attorney
is.
what the process will be.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Right. Anything else? In that case, then, I'm going to call this meeting adjourned at 8:20.
And somebody's gonna have to vet this out. Right in here, the fire district does not enforce any, okay? I did not want to bring it up. I told the chief we were not gonna do anything that appeared to be disparaging or negative, or negative. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay?
But I think,
That's the city agenda.
yeah,
That's the city making this statement.
so what part, I read this and I think I understand what they're saying. So what part,
The district does not enforce any.
any of the city's ordinances or regulations?
Okay, here, let me, maybe I'm doing the wrong goddamn line. It's time to put on some glasses. Yeah.